Speaking of the truth, my next guest, part of his job, the whole job, seems to be digging for that very thing. He's the president of Empower Oversight. Tristan Leavitt joins us now. Tristan, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Vince.
Tristan, a really important story here that your organization has been digging up, and I swear to you, it is not getting the attention it deserves. Senate Republicans this week say they are now investigating allegations that the United States Department of Justice has been spying on the United States Congress. What can you tell us?
Well, this really all, in the most recent iteration, dates back to information that my partner, Jason Foster, received. So Google notified him that when he was Senator Grassley's chief investigative counsel, he and I both used to work for Senator Grassley, and I had left by that point. He was notified that early in the beginning of the Trump administration that there was a subpoena received by Google for his records. And it's clear that they received subscriber information there from them. And so we've now pieced together, some idea of what this relates to. It appears that it was at a time when Senator Grassley was starting to investigate the leak of the Carter Page FISA request, and we have dug up information surrounding that. Of course, this was in the news a few years ago a couple of times. First, because ultimately it appeared that Senate Intelligence Committee staffer James Wolfe was the one who was ultimately responsible for the leak, and then thereafter, because at the beginning of the Biden administration, Adam Schiff also came out and noted that it appeared that his records had been requested. So it seems that the Justice Department early in the Trump administration just cast a very wide net for Senate staff and members and House staff and members to try and figure out who this leak came from. And we think it was very inappropriate.
So there's nothing normal about this, as there, at least there shouldn't be. The executive branch spying on the legislative branch?
Yeah, that's right. And, there's a couple of different issues. One of them is that, first off, as a co-equal branch of government under the Constitution, that's inappropriate. Even disregarding that, the Justice Department has protocols for when they seek the communications of attorneys. And it appears that all the individuals whose communications were sought were attorneys. So DOJ, even if they missed the constitutional implications here, also disregarded their own guidance for requesting attorney communications. So it's extremely problematic. It's also very problematic that it was delayed for so long in being released. So it appears that the Justice Department, under both the Trump and the Biden administrations, continued to renew the non-disclosure orders, such that it's only now that Jason Foster got this notification when this happened several years ago.
And Jason has not been accused of any sort of crime by the Justice Department, has he? He wasn't engaged in anything that you would say was illegal activity. His sin, as far as I can tell, was he was involved in investigating the executive branch, so they decided to turn their weapons on him?
Yeah, that's right. So he was one of many staff that it seems that they sought. It seems like what they were trying to do was to figure out, looking at the universe of all staff who had access to this information about Carter Page. Empower Oversight filed 2 different FOIA requests at the end of October. And of course, one of the main questions that we have is whether the executive branch also sought after the communications of executive branch staff who had access to this information. Because if not, then clearly they, then that takes it from, okay, there was a leak of classified information. You have to run that down to this was a fishing expedition. Because if you really wanted to get at who leaked it, the universe is a lot wider than just the congressional staff that had access to it.
This reminds me in many ways of the CIA spying on the United States Senate a number of years back, because the Senate was conducting an investigation of the CIA, specifically as it related to, I believe it was torture at the time. And in return, the CIA started spying on the Senate, and then John Brennan lied about it and said that that wasn't happening, and then eventually would have to eat his words and then sort of arrogantly defend it anyway. This happens from time to time, doesn't it?
That's right. And I would say that this is significantly worse because at that time, when Feinstein's staff were compiling that report on waterboarding, they had agreed to a number of conditions, and some of those, surrounded. I'm not saying that what happened was right, the access to their information, but they had gone on to executive branch, intelligence community property. They were using their computers. They really had agreed to a lot of conditions. And those were part of how it was that the CIA came to access that. In this case, there was no such thing. They sought out the communications of legislative branch staff, and to me, that's just such a dramatic shift, elevation, if you will, in them prying into the affairs of another branch, doing oversight of their own work.
So are Democrats in Congress who were subjected to this? You mentioned Adam Schiff. Are they exercised about this? Are they joining forces with Republicans to try and put the Justice Department in check?
So I know that back in, like I said, it was in 2021, and it's both Congressman Schiff and Adam Swalwell whose communications had been there had been requests for those. Right now the follow up, the oversight that I've seen has come from House Republicans and from Senate Republicans. I haven't had communications myself with any of them. Again, we put out our FOIA request, and I know Jason, my partner, has been busy trying to answer questions from a lot of different quarters. But so I haven't seen any evidence right now that Democrats are following up on this, but they should, because again, this is a matter of one branch under the Constitution, intruding on the affairs of another. It's not a partisan thing one way or the other. Yes,
that's exactly right. And in fact, the legislative branch is supposed to have oversight of the executive branch, not the other way around. So
precisely. Well, and they were exercising that oversight. Again, to be clear, the whole way that this came about was because all the people who had access to this information were people who were conducting oversight of whether the FBI had improperly relied on this information. So they were right in the midst of that oversight, and this was the mechanism that the executive branch used to fight back.
So in other words, are you concerned? Should members of the Senate and their staffs, and the House for that matter, should they expect that it could be the case today that the Justice Department is spying on them?
So there's guidance that was put out just in the last week or so. I think the date, again, it was just in the last week or so, and it was an update on what requirements there are. Basically, all that it said was that the Public Integrity Unit within the Justice Department has to sign off on it. So I do think that Congress needs to take further steps. If, and you can envision scenarios where there need to be leak investigations, of course, right? It's very, very important that we protect classified information. So some of the mechanisms that could be put in place are to ensure that if there is any sort of monitoring or request for communications like this in the future, that the Justice Department has to notify the leadership of Congress. There's steps like that you could take to make sure that there's proper respect for a co-equal branch. So there are these minor changes, but I do still think that Congress still needs to worry about this kind of thing unless they make some legislative requirements for it.
Yeah, this can't be done in secret. This is like straight up Soviet. You have to be communicating with people and do this on the up and up. What comes next in terms of digging into this, if anything? Is there any more that Empower Oversight, your organization, is doing to try and figure out what else is going on?
So we have these FOIA requests. We'll see what information comes from the House and Senate requests. And of course, we're going to be digging in with the, communication providers. So one of those is Google. There are other phone providers that, for instance, Jason Foster used at the time. And so we're trying to figure out if they also submitted requests to those other people. Google seems to have a somewhat forward-leaning policy of notifying, its subscribers. And so we're trying to figure out if there are other communications entities that may have had records requests for him that haven't yet notified him about that. So we'll keep at it. Go ahead.
And did Google disclose his records or no?
Well, it's subscriber information, right? So it's not the communications themselves, such as his emails or the content of phone calls. It's information. It's like call logs, who he called, other things like that. What yes. The MAC IDs of the devices that he accessed things from. So, that's different from the substance of the communications. But again, no one has any business knowing when Jason Foster calls Senator Grassley to update him on an issue.
But sorry, just to make it clear, did Google disclose that metadata, that the information about his phone calls?
Yes.
Okay, so
just
Google
not the substance or the substance of emails or phone calls, but all of that other metadata they did disclose.
Got it. All right. Well, I'd like to see some evidence. Sometimes these big tech companies will fight back against some of this. Other times they just seem to roll over and give away this private information. It looks like that's what happened here. With that said, unless you have something else to add, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Tristan.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Vince.